Thanks very much for having me, Soft Centre. It's really fantastic to be here today in this amazing hall. When I was a student, I wrote the music for a production about the Haymarket riots, so that 8 hours of work, play and sleep seems particularly relevant. I'm a composer, trained as a composer and a performer, and over the last sort of 11 years or so I've done a lot of different projects involving AI in lots and lots of different ways. I'll be doing a performance tonight at Miscellanea of one of the projects from that work, and I'll be doing another performance next week. But I wanted to mention three very recent projects that I've done to sort of show you the different ways that I try to think about AI in my own work as an artist. So the first one I want to mention is a project called the Text Score Dataset. This is a project that launched in 2021. I really love text scores. When I discovered Fluxus text scores when I was a student, I felt like I was discovering, folklore of the avant-garde, and I really sort of fell in love with them. And so this was a project where I collected over 3,000 different text scores from Fluxus on through to today, and then made a network that could be trained on these text scores so that I could write more text scores. So you can see there's 12 volumes of this data set. Most of them are copyright infringement, because I collected a lot of material without asking for permission. The project continues on. There's a booklet that you can read on the website with essays about how the project was put together and examples from the project. There's an essay also by my assistant, who was the human that did the data entry, about what that did to his brain, having to sort of convert like JPEGs taken in museums of text scores, into nice little clean data that the network could deal with. But this sort of gave me a sense, when I worked on this project, of the scale of how difficult it is to put a data set together. It took us years to put this together. We worked with lots of different data scientists and programmers to put it together. You can now upload your own text scores to be involved in the 2.0 data set if you want to. You can perform the scores freely if you like. So that was sort of one project that I did. Another project that I did last year was called Oscailt, which is Irish for open. This was a project, I would really call it like Benjamin Britten wrote The Young Person's Guide to the Orchestra, and this is sort of like the young person's guide to AI. It was commissioned by Music Network in Ireland, and each performance had teenagers involved in it, and I was trying to basically educate them about how the Irish landscape has been completely transformed by the big tech companies that have built massive data centers in Ireland, and about how they now live in a country that's not merely mythological and ancient, but futurological and very much involved with the processing of all the data that networks are trained on for machine learning purposes. The last project is a project that will be released next month, and this is an album of tracks, which is a performance of Kurt Schwitter's Ursonate. If the avant-garde text scores are folklore, then Ursonate is sort of like the Bible, I suppose, for those of us that are interested in the voice and interested in text and the avant-garde. So this is an entirely machine learning generated album, which constitutes a new performance of Ursonate. So I mention these projects because I'm a composer first. I'm a theorist only sort of by an urgent second, when I sort of feel forced to write about something, or I feel like I have to write about something to try and get my thoughts down. So the first time that I started writing about AI was in 2018, and I wrote an essay called The Ghosts of the Hidden Layer, that covered everything from, and I'll go from the upper left-hand corner, Ashtalk, which is a project of mine, which is a completely fictional history of the Irish avant-garde. You can see Professor Hiroshi Ishiguro in the middle at the bottom there, and you can see that's his Geminoid, which is a robot that looks exactly like him, and he's sort of my god because he's an academic and he sends that robot to meetings, committee meetings, and a PhD student operates it. So like that's hashtag life goal. Above him is his Atonoroid, one of his other robots. In the upper right-hand corner is Michael Winslow, who was in the Police Academy movies. He's the guy that does all the amazing sounds with his voice. And I was at a children's party that IBM threw where he did a performance in Dublin, and it sort of changed my life. Then you've got Martin McGuinness, who was a member of the IRA, and the reason I talk about him in the essay is because the British government did a voice ban on members of the IRA. So Stephen Ray used to overdub his voice whenever Martin McGuinness was filmed speaking for BBC. And then I had to put this in, the lyrebird, you know, from Australia, because so all of this is to do with the voice and how the voice can be imitated and replicated and copied and distributed in different ways. So this was sort of, when I wrote this essay in 2018, it ended with me saying, what's coming next is AI. This is what's on the agenda. And I gave this talk, I gave a talk about the essay in Darmstadt at the Contemporary Music Summer Courses. And I think 2 people asked me questions afterwards. One of them was George Lewis, who really wanted to get into it and like discuss the singularity. But a lot of people were like, it's just a weird hobby. It's like train spotting, you know, just sort of leave her to it. She's interested in sort of machine learning, but you know, they sort of felt that it was something that was not going to really affect art in any huge way for a long time. So a couple of years later, on the far side of the pandemic, I found myself again in the same place that I was when I wrote Ghosts of the Hidden Layer. I felt like it was really necessary to try to put my thoughts down about what was happening with art and music in AI. And that resulted in this essay, which is the one I'm going to talk about today, which is called 13 Ways of Looking at AI, Art and Music, which is, if the Schumann Bazaar is a meet cute at the end of the internet, this is a meet cute with Wallace Stevens references. But this was an essay that I wrote sort of at the beginning. I would say I started it in spring last year and I finished it up around the summer. And this was really me trying to come to terms with what had happened to machine learning in between when I wrote Ghost of the Hidden Layer and the pandemic and NFTs and DAOs and Web 3.3, and then all of a sudden we have, you know, Midjourney and DALL-E and Stable Diffusion and all of these different systems. So this is what I'm going to talk about today. I'm not going to cover all 13 ways because that would take way too long. I'm just going to talk about a couple of them. But before we get into that, what I want to do is show you an example. Maybe you're all very familiar with these platforms, but I want to sort of show you how quickly they're developing. So when I see text to audio platforms, one of the pieces of text that I put in is this quotation from Anthony Burgess's A Clockwork Orange. And this is when Alex is listening to Beethoven. And Alex describes it as, oh, it was gorgeousness and gorgeosity made flesh. The trombones crunched red gold under my bed, and behind my Gulliver the trumpets three-wise silver flamed. Oh, it was wonder of wonders. I was in such bliss, my brothers. When I was a teenager and I ill-advisedly read A Clockwork Orange as a young child, the ultra-violence of the book was not the thing that I walked away from. What I sort of stayed with me was these really purple prose descriptions of music that I thought were really quite wonderful and made me want to go and listen to Beethoven. So there should be a trigger warning, I suppose, about that on the movie. But I like to sort of take this text and I like to put it into different platforms just to see what it makes of it. So the first example I'm going to play you is, this is from Google's Test Kitchen, and this is a year ago. I mean, there's some brass in there for the trombones crunching red gold, you know, but it's a bit janky. There's lots of artifacts in the sound. It sort of sounds pompous. It sort of sounds like sort of British orchestral music that you would hear from somebody's car on a Sunday or something like that. So what's interesting to me is flash forward just a year later than when I generated that, and I'm able to use Udio to do this.
Oh, it was gorgeousness!
Oh, it was gorgeous!
And gorgeosity made flesh!
The trombones crunch red gold under my bed, behind my Gulliver. The trumpets three-wise silver flame. Oh, wonder of wonders. such bliss, my brothers.
So that's how much the technology has moved forward in a year. And literally this took 20 seconds for me to generate. So what do we make of this? How do we even begin to think about what it means to make art? You know, if this is the way that art, the rapidity, the sort of the sheer scale at which you can produce works of orchestral music with vocals in them. You know, that the network generated those vocals. I didn't ask it to, it just used the text to do that. So this is the context in which I'm sort of trying to think about what are ways that we can think about AI. And what I was struck by, particularly last year, was that so many newspapers were coming out with op-eds, so many people were writing articles about it, and it always seemed to have one clear take, one hot take or lukewarm take, one takeaway that people had. They were generally either for AI or against it. But I felt that that was missing out the nuances that exist within the technology. So I started trying to think about AI through all of these different lenses because I felt that that was necessary. So the very, very first lens that I have in the, we can have, you know, you can have a network that can generate that music and my computer can't switch to the next slide, so that's the future. So the first lens that I sort of seemed really, really clearly obvious and sort of necessary for thinking about AI is fan fiction. So I'm sure you all know what fan fiction is, but for those of you who may not, it's a practice of making content related to pre-existing intellectual property that you've no legal claim to work with in order to contribute to the fandom that exists around that intellectual property. It's not plagiarism. When a fan creates a piece of fan fiction, the intent isn't to pass off the work as their own in the traditional sense. You know, the readers of a piece of Star Wars fan fiction, they, you know, fully understand that the author of that fan fiction didn't create Star Wars, and they will judge the author's skills and they will judge the actual piece of fan fiction itself on how imaginatively and well that fan fiction functions within the character universe of Star Wars. So for both authors and readers, the creation and the consumption of fan fiction amount to the same thing. It's about the fact that you're a member of a specific fandom, that you take delight in that fandom, and that by extending and enriching that fandom, you're sort of performing an act of service for other people within that fandom. I think it's really important that we take fan fiction and the idea of fandom very, very seriously. When Trump, I think it was last week, he, I don't know what you do on Truth Social, you tweet, I don't know, post. When you Truth Socialed a picture of an AI generated image of Taylor Swift fans saying Swifties for Trump, you're sort of seeing a, you know, would-be presidential candidate taking a fandom around a pop star so seriously that they're willing to spread misinformation about that fandom's endorsement of their campaign. So within fan fiction communities, one of the most important practices is shipping, where fans hope that, you know, two characters are going to get it on, preferably in graphic detail, and it's sort of amazing because fans will sort of watch the, I mean, if I can take a nod to James saying he wasn't going to do Derrida, fans will look at what postmodernists call the text, to a level of forensic detail that Derrida would only have dreamed of, trying to find secret yearnings and forbidden lust. When I was working on the essay, I looked at the Ted Lasso fandom on Tumblr, and I found all of these screenshots of people saying Ted Lasso and Trent Crimm are in love. And you can see, because, you know, Trent Crimm holds this mug in this certain scene, which, you know, references his secret lust for Ted. So you sort of see people really delving into the text and trying to find the proof of these certain different relationships that they wish were happening. Now, what's interesting to me, and the reason I bring up shipping, is that it doesn't just apply to fictional characters; it applies to humans who have vast fandoms that surround them. So One Direction have a particularly devoted fandom, which is really active even now, 8 years since the band broke up. And there's a subset of One Direction fans who call themselves Larrys, who are obsessed with the idea that Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson are secretly in love. Sort of, Louis Tomlinson made this offhand, idiotic tweet, which basically gave the fans enough material to still base this obsession on all these years later, when he tweeted, "Always in my heart, Harry Styles, yours sincerely, Lewis." And so the fandom are sort of obsessed with this because this added fuel to the conspiracy fires. Now, the reason I bring it up is that it's very, you know, what the Larry Stylinson fans have done to Harry Styles and Louis Tomlinson is pretty messed up. You know, they claim that Louis Tomlinson's son was never born. They claim that their relationships are fake and that they're all staged. They harass them, they harass their partners. So this is an instance where you have fandom and sort of shipping, which seems like a playful thing when it's like Kirk and Spock, you know, getting it on. But it's a very, very different situation when you're saying these are two real people that do exist in the real world, and we're going to harass their partners because we want this secret relationship, which we feel should have happened, to happen. And this is sort of considered a form of extending the fandom. It's sort of harassment as a form of fan service. So, you know, Roland Barthes wrote about the death of the author, but with fan fiction, I think we need to extend this concept that it's the death of everybody involved. Human beings are flattened into fictional characters within their intellectual properties fandom. And this flattening sort of negates their rights and their personhood, but it's necessary so that the fan fiction can take place. And in this way, fan fiction operates a lot like AI-generated art and music does. So what's very, very notable to me is that the AI-generated music that makes the most headlines is all essentially fan fiction. The track that, you know, really sort of pushed it into the mainstream, which was Ghost Rider's Heart on My Sleeve, which is supposed to sound like Drake and The Weeknd. That is a form of fan fiction about those two people, and like that was what was most interesting to the press, to the public, was that we can see a pre-existing IP's domain being expanded through AI. Now, they're not the only people. Oasis have just reformed, which means that the album Oasis, which is AI-generated tracks in the style of Oasis by Oasis tribute band Breezer, you know, that's not so necessary anymore. But it's very clear from the YouTube comments on this album that it filled the gap for a lot of Oasis fans who were really desperate for more content. So I'm curious if people will go back and listen to that now that Oasis have thankfully reformed, or non-thankfully, I don't know your position on Oasis here in Australia. But when I listen to these tracks, when I'm listening to, you know, Breezer's Oasis album, or I'm listening to Ariana Grande somehow singing The Weeknd's Blinded by the Lights, I'm trying to figure out, what am I listening to? Am I listening to a cover? Am I listening to a mashup? Am I listening to like a bootleg? Is it a meme? What is it? I think the way that it makes the most sense to me is that I listen to these music as fan fiction, that I hear it as fan fiction rather than a standalone piece of music, and that I interpret it in the context of fan fiction. What I also hear when I listen to this music is I hear what people want to do with music, what they enjoy doing with music. And one of the things that they want to do is completely disregard the will of the artist, completely disregard copyright law, and just make stuff that they think is funny, and that extends their fandom around that artist. It drives home to me when I listen to this sort of music that all the takedown notices in the world, all the lawsuits will have absolutely no impact. Because once you have a culture in which an artist and their output is essentially viewed as a fun data set that we can play with, which fans can repurpose to build, you know, highly imaginative, interactive universes, there's no going back. You can't undo that progress. And so I get a glimpse of a future where the ability of an artist's music to be successful and is going to be linked to the ability of that music to be modeled easily, to be interacted with. that artists are going to design music and outputs that are sticky, that are distinctive, that can be easily referenced. A future where, you know, you're going to have to deal with the fact that, like, if your music can easily facilitate AI-assisted fandom, that's probably going to get your music to travel much further than it might not. And there's also the possibility that that might secure your profits long after you're dead, because more of your music, more of the fandom can be extended. So I see a future where fandoms are going to create music and experiences that are wildly imaginative and life-affirming, experiences that might exist outside of a standard concert performance, might exist out of the standard idea of what an album is or how an album functions. I see possibilities for new models of collaboration, for new models of compensation and community building, but I also see models for new, you know, forms of exploitation, new forms of exclusion, and I see a lot of Larry Stylinsons, you know, in the future, being harassed and sort of having their, if we can think of it, they're having their intellectual property sort of deployed in ways they never intended for it to. But it's also useful for me to think of music through the lens of fan fiction, because it, as we say in Ireland, we didn't lick it off a stone. It might seem terribly new, but we didn't invent this concept, you know? That took a while for it to sink in, but that's all right. In 1792, which was the year after Mozart's death, his publisher Niklas Simrock published a piece that he attributed to Mozart, called The Dice Game, the Musikalisches Würfelspiel. Now, this was a sort of a table that consisted, you can see in the upper part of this, you have these two tables which consisted of 176 individual bars of music, and then if you were a Mozart fan, and given he's just died, so you can't get any more new Mozart, so it's pretty exciting that you can make some new Mozart at home in your house with some dice. You can roll some dice, you can combine these different bars together, and you can get your own individual Mozart waltz. And there was a fashion for these sort of musical dice games at the time. So it's also something that feels like very modern and new, and that everybody wants one in their parlor, one of these musical dice games. So the idea that you could take a musician like Mozart, who just died, you could continue to monetize them, and you could allow the public to intervene in it and let those outputs be individualized. That doesn't sound like 1792, it sounds like 2024 to me. Very much so. And so when Holly Herndon released Holly Plus, which is a really, really interesting project where anybody can take a pre-existing sound file and they can sort of put it through the Holly filter and upload it to the Holly Plus website, and it spits out a WAV that sort of has been processed in a style transfer way through Holly's voice. I thought, oh, okay, this makes total sense to me because this is fan fiction. This is a way to extend fan fiction, to extend sort of Holly's universe. So the example that I'm going to play you is an iteration of Mozart's Würfelspiel that's been put through the Holly Plus filter for maximum efficiency. Is AI as an energy drink. So has anybody drank an energy drink today? One person. What was the color of the fluid inside the probably can?
Is it Walshe yellow?
Okay, yes. Not a really fun color to look at in a drink. No, not appealing. Okay. So I think of AI as an energy drink. But in order to think of it that, we have to think about whether an energy drink is food or not. Is it a beverage in the traditional sense? Does it provide nutrition? I found a lot of descriptions, because I did a lot of research about energy drinks, which is very weird corner of the nutritional internet. And I found them described as edible non-foods, dietary supplements, a class of products in liquid form. But I was trying to think, like, well, what is it? Like, I don't know. We have Calpol in Ireland. It's this, you know, it's a liquid medicine that people give to their babies to make their babies go to sleep. That's just a side effect. It's a side effect of it. We've got Floridix, which is like an iron supplement that comes in a bottle. And I don't think of Calpol or Floridix as a beverage, you know, even though you drink it. I maybe think of it as a class of product in liquid form. I know that if I drink an energy drink, it will slake my thirst. So it fulfills the traditional function of a drink, but you know, I sort of don't think of it as milk or tea or something like that. And in this way, energy drinks are a lot like art produced by AI systems. So if I direct a generative system like Midjourney or Stable Diffusion or DALL-E to churn out an image of the cliffs of Moher in the style of Van Gogh, do I think that those images are art, or do I think that there's something else? Those two outputs that I played you that were, you know, that I used the Anthony Burgess quote to generate, do I think of them as music? Or do I think of them as actual demonstrations, like they're actually training data from the algorithm? What are they? John Cage, the composer, he would say, how I frame something determines whether it's art or not. If I say it's art, as my granny would say, if I think it's pornography, it's pornography. So sort of, you know, if I decide that something is art, it's art to me. But I'm really not so sure about the outputs of a lot of these networks. And so I sort of have started to think of a lot of the outputs of these networks as a class of products in artistic form, if I can paraphrase my nutrition researcher. So energy drinks are marketed as functional drinks. They're drinks that are supposed to have a specific effect. They're supposed to allow you to be more productive, more focused. Do you feel more productive, more focused? No, okay, I'm sorry. So the idea with energy drinks is that most people might direct that word toward that sort of functionality towards partying. Some people might say, no, I want to write an essay, or some people might say, I want to come to a session of talks. But the idea is that, you know, you can sort of do more for less. You know, you can get by on less sleep, you can get by on less energy, less focus. And this is what these systems are supposed to allow us to do, these different AI platforms. Maybe, you know, you wrote a story, but you can't draw. That doesn't matter, because the AI can. Or maybe you didn't write a story, but you have an idea for a story. Well, just hand that over to ChatGPT and get them to flesh it out for you. Maybe you don't even have an idea for a story. That's fine. The AI, you know, will sort it all out. It'll give you wings. The reason that these systems work is they work because they've been trained on billions of pre-existing words, images, sounds, the bulk of which were made by humans who received no compensation, no recognition for having unknowingly provided this training data. And all of that labor is hidden at the heart of generative AI. The other issue is that it's often extremely difficult for us to know, like, why these networks make the decisions they do, how they come to spitting out this image rather than that image. The network is processing inputs through all of these different hidden layers, which lie at the heart of the code. Our only way of interacting with most of these systems are through the context window that we type into and that we choose either output 1, 2, 3, or 4. And so AI continues to be like an energy drink, because an energy drink isn't designed to be seen, and it's not designed to be understood. It's designed to be drunk out of a can on a packed train on the way to work. You probably don't know what the color of the drink is, and it's quite a horrible color by what you're saying. And you probably don't know what taurine or L-carnitine or any of the other ingredients are in the drink. You just know that it has an effect, that it will do something. And that's the issue with AI, is that for many of us, when we're interacting, for the vast majority, I would say, of us, we're just interacting with these platforms. We're not sure what's in them. We're not sure why they're making the outputs that they do, but we know that it might get us closer to, you know, completing our side hustle. finishing a piece of art that we have no technical knowledge how to create. And we're all living under late capitalism, and we're all exhausted, and we're all late, and this is what's going to get us to the end of the project. So that's sort of, I think, something that's worth reflecting on. Yet again, what I find interesting is that historically, we didn't make this up. We weren't the first people to be interested in algorithmically sound ways of producing art. I mentioned Mozart before. I'm going to go back a little further in time to Athanasius Kircher, the Jesuit polymath, who invented the Arca Musa Rhythmica, which is over on the left there. This is an information device that allows you to compose 4-part polyphonic church music. And this was composed so that missionaries who were traveling outside of Europe to try to convert people to Christianity could make more hymns. Because that was what was really getting people on board, was hearing this 4-part polyphonic music. So you take a missionary who doesn't know how to compose, you're sending them away, and you're giving them this sort of little machine that will allow them to compose loads and loads of music. I also view Arca, the other Arca, over here. I view Arca's album, these sort of bronze instances within this same context. So Arca releases Kiki, which is an album in 2020. It's the first album that she releases post-transition, and one of the tracks on the album called Rikiki. She then takes that album and she uses AI to create 100 different remixes of this. The company who did it were called Bronze, so it's often called the Bronze instances of Rikiki. So you have an artist who's able to make 100 remixes just using AI. That's something that they can easily do, is create a huge amount of material very, very easily. So what I've done here is I've taken one of the outputs of Athanasius Kircher's Arca Musa Rhythmica and one of the bronze instances and mixed them together. I'm not sure what time I started at. I think I have another 5 minutes or so left.
About 10.
Oh, I've got 10. Okay, fantastic. Okay, great. So I'm going to come on to the last way of thinking about AI I'm going to talk about today. And this is that AI is a companion species. This is what I'm interested in because I'm interested in interacting with these networks. I'm interested in singing with them, through them, against them, everything like that. And so I'm thinking a lot about, when we're working with AI to make art, what sort of relationships do we enter into with these networks? What entanglements result? Do we view these networks as assistants that we're going to wake up with the wake word? Do we view them as interns or servants? Are they sort of a fantasy partner muse? What are they? And these relationships are real, and they're really worth thinking about. I think of early projects in this space, like George Lewis's Voyager project, which was launched in 1987 and has different iterations through to today. This is a project where you could improvise. It had to be MIDI based because this was symbolic AI rather than machine learning, so this didn't involve a data set. It involved George's conceptualizations of how improvisers would interact with different networks. And so this was a sort of an early project where it was about improvisation, and it was about people who were skilled improvisers entering into these relationships and dialogues with the networks in real time. Tomomi, his project, Voices from AI and Experimental Improvisation. I'm lazy, so I just call it Tomomi Bot. I hope that's okay, Tomomi. This is a fantastic project where Tomomi trained a system in collaboration with Andreas and Marcello to be able to function in real time, working with iterations of Tomomi's voice. And So I'm very interested in this project world because this is a world that I've worked in as well. So in 2018, I did a project called Ultrachunk. This was in collaboration with the artist and technologist Memo Akten, who's a fantastic Turkish practitioner. I highly recommend you check out Memo's website. There's loads of amazing projects that he's done. And this project was a bit of a grind to get off get off the runway, because it involved me creating a data set based on my own voice. And so I spent a year making videos of myself improvising. Now this was before the pandemic, and we all had to retouch our appearances on Zoom. So it was pretty brutal to have to look into my computer's webcam and make all these videos from 2017 into 2018 of myself improvising. And it took a long, long time. And it again gave me a sense of the scale that's involved. For me, just to make a data set that could function in an okay way, trained on me, it took a year of me making these videos. So it's a lot of work. When the idea was that the output would be a system that I could improvise with, and the system would generate images of me and sound of me in real time, so I could interact with this system. And this is what Memo did. He created this really, really complicated machine learning system. So with Ultrachunk, when I perform with it, I enter into a relationship with the network in real time, it's alive. And as we were working on the project, Memo and I discussed the nature of this relationship a lot. Like as I was doing the training, I kept a journal where I would make my notes every day about like the way I was thinking about AI or how the system might interpret what I was doing and things like that. So I was spending a lot of time sort of musing on this. When Memo and I were initially working on the project, the two metaphors that we used the most were summoning and wrangling. Because we both liked the occult and we thought it was sort of cool. And then also we both we were both thinking about like what it is to train and work with an animal, in the sense of like a circus wrangler maybe trying to make sure a lion doesn't eat them but can do some tricks. So these two metaphors still stand for me because they sort of sum up how it felt to sing live with Ultrachunk. It felt like something was being conjured up, but it also felt that it was slightly dangerous and out of control, and it could do something unpredictable at any second. It was a sort of a non-human entity that I was engaging with. During the premiere performance, another metaphor emerged for me, which was that improvising, which is something I've done for over 20 years, it's a huge part of my practice. Improvising with Ultrachunk was like improvising with someone who was high. No judgment, but I don't ever improvise high. That's not my thing. But improvising with Ultrachunk was like improvising with a version of me who was high. On a drug that I've never taken, and I don't know what the effects of it are. It was a very strange experience. And my job was to sort of be the adult in the room and sort of trust that Ultrachunk was going to contribute very strongly, if very chaotically, at times, and I should just perform as normal and try to manage, the things that people who are high tend to neglect, like long-term structure or thanking the sound engineer, things like that. So it wasn't until much later, when I sort of had recovered from the ontological shock, and my friends and family had recovered from the ontological shock of having to watch a weird video-generated version of me, that the metaphor that felt the most accurate sort of snapped into place, which was that Ultrachunk, AI in general, is a form of companion species. It's a non-human entity that we enter into a relationship with. Now, I use the term companion species in the sense that Donna Haraway uses it, in that she's referring to non-human species which humans work alongside and enter into relationships with. So if you have an assistance dog or you have a sheepdog, you're in a companion species relationship with it, as are all the microbes in your digestive system. So it sort of you can work together and you can achieve things. As much as I love my cat, I would never say I was in a companion species relationship with my cat, like I'm his servant. You know what I mean? So it's not like we accomplish things together. I just do things for him. Whereas, you know, when I've had dogs that I've worked with, I can feel there's a different sense that we're accomplishing something together. In a companion species relationship, there's no dominance. You're mutually dependent on one another and you have to work together to survive, despite the fact that you do not understand how the other species senses the world or processes the world on a fundamental level. So in order to really think and live companion species, and I'm paraphrasing Donna Haraway, we have to try and meet the world as non-humans do. We have to understand the world on their terms, not our own. And we have to understand how other forms of intelligence perceive the world, which means understanding how they process our behavior and taking responsibility, and this is absolutely key, for the repercussions of their actions as well as our own. So this isn't just like a sort of a cute, pet-friendly way of thinking about AI. It's a way to remind ourselves that a lot of work is required of us, because ultimately it's people who will decide what these networks will do, and it's people who will produce the joy as well as the brutal violence that will result from these networks. So we need to demand a stake in the networks because we're going to be working alongside them, and we need involvement in them. So what I'd like to close with is I'm just going to show you a brief excerpt from Ultrachunk, because this, for me, was the beginnings of thinking about how I interact with these networks, what happens, you know, what am I responsible for? And I could do this in a really small artistic context, but it sort of gave me a model for how I could expand that out to a much, much larger context. So I will play you just a brief excerpt now. I'm going to really, really quickly explain what you're seeing on the screen, because Memo would be really pleased. Up the top, you can see there's a sort of a barcode. This is the 100-dimensional hypersphere that the network is navigating its way through. Those are like different options. Down the bottom, the green and the red show the degree of intensity of listening. There's times where Ultrachunk listens really closely to me, and there's times where it doesn't. And then you've got a sonogram in the background. What you see on the screen, I have to really stress, is being generated in real time, about 20 frames of video per second. And the only material that the network has ever been trained on is video of me, God love it. So what you're seeing on the screen, these are sort of GAN architectures. So it does all the horrible things that GAN does, where it gives me like 2 sets of eyes, extra teeth, things like that. So it's quite uncanny when you watch it. So I'll just give you a minute of this. Stop it there. Thanks very much.
Not sure there is.
Oh, okay. Oh, sorry. I thought there was.
Look,
okay. If anybody has any questions,
one question.
Okay.
Yes. Can I get one question? Yeah. Awesome.
better be really, really good.
Okay, yeah, all right, here we go. What's your favorite? No, okay. The question is this. That was fantastic. Thank you. The section where you were talking about fan fiction, and you mentioned this idea that once we think about our data sets as like fan fiction or whatever, like to be fucked with, there's no going back. And I thought it was really interesting you mentioned Holly Herndon. I'm thinking of her recent work for the Whitney Biennale, in which she trained all these data sets on like corrupted images of herself, so that in the future, theoretically, when people search for Holly Herndon, who's a really well-known image, it's corrupted in these like monstrous images. So I guess I'm like curious if you think there are any forms of resistance possible.
I think that certainly there's people been working on forms of resistance. I know Holly's partner Matt Dryhurst did a project that vastly preceded called Saga, and the idea was that like you could embed certain code in a JPEG, and so it would behave in different, circumstances in different ways. So if it was on a website you didn't like, it would like go, I don't know, pixelated or something like that. I think the work they're doing is fantastic. I suppose that I'm much more of a pragmatic Irish person, which goes, there's absolutely no way to put the cat back in the bag in this situation. And having seen, students make screen captures of images which are watermarked by universities, or institutions in order to do a PowerPoint presentation, there's a whole load of ways around all of those, all of those fail-safes. So I suppose I would say, like, I think it's fantastic if people are trying to work to see how we could have some sort of ownership of those images, but the second it's on the internet, it's fair game, and we don't have any control over it. So I suppose the only way to sort of make sure that your images won't be distributed or used in training purposes is not to post them anywhere. That's the only option at this stage. Thanks, I've ended on a very hopeful note.